This is Mary Maxine Likes to Talk with me, Mary Maxine. This is a series dedicated to talking about all the different fun facts that I find fun, factual, and that I like to talk about. In this episode, Mary Maxine likes to talk about the book Hatchet and stuff. Alrighty, folks. Well, I just finished reading Hatchet again, which is one of my all-time favorite books. Pretty sure I read it for the first time when I was like 13 and grounded, so I had nothing to do but read. I was absolutely fascinated with the way the main character, Brian, managed to survive. And yes, I know it's a hypothetical, but it seemed really real to me when I was 13, the same age as Brian in the book. And he's stranded for 54 days in the Canadian wilderness when the pilot of his small Cessna, it's always a Cessna, the plane he's flying in, the pilot has a heart attack and dies. The plane crashes, and the book pretty well goes from there. I love it. If you haven't read it, read it. It's a quick read, and you'll find it everywhere books are sold or rented, i.e. the library. So he survives the crash with only the hatchet on his belt. The hatchet his mother gave him just before he took off to go visit his dad. Whose mother hasn't given them a weapon before getting on an airplane, you know? Yes, this book is definitely pre-9/11, but a hatchet? Not even an engraved hatchet or anything, just a hatchet. Jeez. So the plane crashes into the lake. He escapes the plane with just the hatchet. He builds a shelter against a rock wall kind of thing, and he's luckily able to drink the lake water, which I'm like, gross, look at all the floaties in my drink. Then Brian lives off what we learn are choke cherries. I'm also like, gross, I don't like cherries. So I'd be in a real pickle here. But he eventually manages to make a bow and arrow, which I'm also not entirely convinced that would have been possible for me. I'm just not that crafty. But he does it. And he manages to use his bow and arrow to capture fish and small game and stuff, and so he manages to survive. He creates a fire using the hatchet, which does end up saving his life, the fire and the hatchet, because now he's able to cook food and stay warm. So there, he had it all covered, and then 54 days later, he, finds a way into the airplane. This is a major spoiler alert. If you don't want to know how the book ends, stop now. Like I said, major spoiler here. Brian manages to get back into the airplane where he finds the survival bag in there, and he finds all this food and this radio, and he's like, oh, there's no way that works. So he flips it on and off, and it ends up being an emergency beacon. And then an hour later, somebody lands on the lake he's at with a little float plane, and they're like, hey, I saw your emergency beacon. Holy crap, you're that kid, aren't you? And then he's rescued. So I would die of whatever happened first, whether it was thirst or hunger or exposure. It would be very, very quick. Definitely not 54 days worth of a novel. But there is the rule of threes that I know about. It's the general rule that a human can live 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Give or take. I'm not a doctor. But obviously, thirst would probably take me first. Thirst would take me first. Anyways, I'm not above munching on some grass, though, which might stave off the thirst and hunger for a little bit. I might eat those cherries, but gross. And I'm no Bear Grylls, so I probably wouldn't drink my own pee. But I've never been that desperate, so shout out to those who have. And I imagine pee would be probably pretty tasty after 3 days without water. Kind of like a Chardonnay, As in Chardonnay tastes like pee. After I read Hatchet, I learned about the book Alive, the one about the rugby team that crashes in the Andes Mountains and they end up having to eat some of their dead teammates to survive. That tale as old as time. They were stuck in the snow. That's even worse. I couldn't survive in the winter somewhere without a shelter, a full shelter. They only had the fuselage of the airplane, which was open on one end and pretty breezy on the other, if I remember correctly. But I would need a shelter that has heat and indoor plumbing. That's the only way. The rescue team would show up and they'd be like, it's only been a couple of hours. It would be a really short novel. I'm telling you that right now. But I like to think I'd be good at surviving. I have made a plan should the big one hit Vancouver. I'm really unsure of how effective it would actually be. And my plan is better suited for a zombie apocalypse or a general apocalypse where it just everything hits the fan. And I've kind of been hoping for the end of the world for a very long time. Not just for the survival aspect, but because the world sucks and would be a better place without humans. But that's a totally different episode. So let's say the grid goes down. There's no electricity, no rescue, it's chaos outside, people looting. What do we do? The starting point of my plan is fresh water. That's the first and number one priority in any emergency situation, fresh water. So I'd be like filling the tubs and the sink, tubs, we only have one, filling the tub and the sinks with as much water as possible, all the jugs, all the bottles that we have, just all the water that can be stored needs to be stored. And my apartment's far enough inland that I don't think the tsunami would totally decimate our building, so we would still have shelter, water, and now I gotta look for food. So now it's time to size up the neighbors for any possibility of alliance, see if they have food to share, and choose which one you would eat first when it comes to it. I say when, not if. Next is weapons, and I don't mean to brag, folks, but I do have the Master Sword from The Legend of Zelda, and I'm not afraid to use it. I suppose now would be a good time to actually have a hatchet. Anyways, use what you have to protect yourself and your loved ones. People may start looting sooner than you'd expect. That's what I've learned from every book, is people start looting right away. Now you also have to take into consideration the number of days you may be without power. It could just be a few days. It could be a couple weeks. It could be months, or in the event of an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, the electricity might never come back on. And a great book you should read about EMPs and all the devastation they can cause. It's actually really crazy and really scary. It's called 1 Second After by William R. Fortune. Last name Forstchen. And it's all about that. An EMP is detonated over North America and all communication goes dark, all electronics stop working, and it goes over how this would affect the regular person, like the main character and his family, but as well as the world at large, like hospitals, prisons, schools, banks, the government, the military. It is an incredible read. I highly recommend that. It's a great survival book. And I just love survival stories. I'll spend hours on YouTube watching the series I Shouldn't Have Survived, or whatever it's called. The ones about people surviving crazy situations like bear attacks in the middle of nowhere, hiking accidents, climbing accidents, people falling overboard, people being stranded. And I've always pictured myself being stranded on an island like in Castaway. If it were to happen, that's where it would happen, because this is my fantasy. But it would be, I think Castaway portrays what alone can really do to somebody. It would be peaceful, though, once you got the hang of it. But he survives for 4 years on that island, talking to a volleyball with a face drawn on it in blood. It's also pretty freaking hardcore. I still do love learning about the survival stuff, and I've got a military survival guide that I read every so often. What with the world coming to an end probably sooner than later, let's be real, folks. I have 2 bug-out bags ready to go with dehydrated food and packets of water, knives, ropes, tarps, radios, batteries, Ziploc bags, collapsible stove, and a shovel, saw, matches. Mostly I have a bunch of camping stuff for somebody who never goes camping. Now again, I like to think I'd survive longer than 15 minutes in the wild, but I've realized over the years that I like the outdoors in theory. Until I get out there and then I remember how many bugs there are outside. There's so many. And that's one thing Castaway doesn't go over, is the bugs on a tropical island. I'd die of cardiac arrest at the first sighting of a big spider or one of those massive centipedes. My rule is the rule of 4. If it has more than 4 legs, it needs to, F right off. Except for bees. Actual bees, not wasps. Bees and bumblebees. They're cute and helpful. Bumblebees may not make honey, but they do pollinate stuff, and they just buzz around and run into things, and to be a bumblebee on a summer's day. Anywho, on that note, thank you so much for listening to Mary Maxine Likes to Talk about the book Hatchet and stuff. What is your favorite survival book? Do you have a disaster survival plan? What do you think of bumblebees? If you have any fun fact topics you'd like to hear about, leave a comment and let me know. Mary Maxine Likes to Talk, available for your ear holes on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, Podcast Addict, and MaryMaxine.ca.